The rain came down in relentless sheets, drumming against the cracked pavement and pooling into muddy streams that slithered toward the gutters of an empty street. The kind of late-night storm that keeps everyone inside, doors locked, windows shut tight. Street lamps flickered weakly, their pale glow distorted through the heavy downpour, casting eerie shadows across the deserted road. And then, in the dim light of one lonely lamp, something small moved, a tiny figure barely visible in the rain. The toddler instinctively reached out with tiny fingers, clutching at the wet fur as if sensing safety. The dog nudged him again, gently but firmly, keeping him awake. It disappeared into the storm, leaving only paw prints in the puddles and the lingering warmth of a miracle that couldn't be explained, because somewhere in that same city, just days later, someone else would recognize the description of that same dog, a dog with a history far more incredible than anyone imagined. By the time help arrived and neighbors gathered, the story had already begun to spread how a stray German shepherd had saved a toddler from the cold rain and then walked away without a trace. But for the woman holding her child close, this wasn't just a story. It was something deeper, a reminder that sometimes heroes come in the most unexpected forms. And for the dog, wandering the dark streets once more, it was just another night, another silent act of kindness, another secret no one would ever fully understand. It stayed close, keeping its body pressed against the small shivering frame, letting the child draw warmth even as its own body trembled from the cold. And then, in the distance, a shadow appeared through the storm, a woman, soaked, crying, running desperately toward the faint sound of the dog's bark. She stumbled into the light of the street lamp and froze at the sight before her. There, on the wet ground, was her child, alive, leaning against a German shepherd she had never seen before. Her breath caught in her throat as she rushed forward, scooping the child into her arms, sobbing with relief. She looked at the dog, her voice shaking. "Thank you. Oh my God. Thank you." But the German shepherd simply stood still, watching for a moment. Its eyes met hers, and in that fleeting gaze was something unexplainable, a quiet knowing, a silent promise. And then, without waiting for praise, without hesitation, the dog turned away, stepping back into the darkness, its silhouette fading into the sheets of rain as if it had never been there. The dog didn't flinch. Instead, it adjusted its stance, using its own body as a shield against the freezing wind. Minutes passed, but the rain only grew heavier. The dog lifted its head and looked down the street, its ears flicking at a distant sound, a faint cry, a woman's voice calling frantically for her child. But the toddler couldn't move, too cold and exhausted to respond. The German shepherd bent its head low, giving a soft, reassuring nudge to the child, and turned and began to bark. Not a loud, aggressive bark, but sharp, deliberate, cutting through the noise of the storm. It barked again, then paused, listening. Somewhere down the block, footsteps splashed through water. Voices grew louder, but still distant. The dog barked once more, this time longer, its deep voice echoing through the narrow street like a beacon. It was a toddler, no more than 2 years old, dressed in a thin, soaked onesie, sitting on the cold ground with trembling hands pressed to the wet asphalt. His little shoes had come off, and his hair clung to his face in damp strands as he whimpered softly, too weak to even cry loudly. Just beyond him lay a tipped-over stroller, its wheels spinning idly in a puddle, and further away, the faint outline of a woman running in panic down another street, too far to hear or see him through the storm. The toddler's breaths came in shaky gasps, each one a silent plea for warmth, for comfort, anything. And then, from the darkness beyond the streetlight's reach, something emerged. A shape, low, deliberate, moving with purpose, a German shepherd. Its fur was matted, soaked through, its ribs faintly visible beneath the heavy rain. This was no pet with a collar, or at least this was a stray, hardened by the streets. But its eyes held an intelligence and focus that didn't belong to a creature that had given up. It paused at the edge of the light, watching the small child with an unreadable expression. The toddler lifted his head weakly, his lips quivering as another gust of cold wind cut through the air. The dog stepped closer, its paws splashing quietly in the shallow puddles, until it stood right over the child, shielding him from the brunt of the rain. For a long moment, they stayed like that, two souls in the storm, one helpless, the other silently deciding what to do. And then the dog moved. It pressed its body closer, lowering itself so the child could lean against its warm side. As the echoes faded, the toddler's head drooped, his eyes fluttering. The woman shouted after it, but the dog didn't stop. But this wasn't the end of the story. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the streets slick with rainwater and scattered branches. The city was quiet again, the chaos of the night replaced by an almost eerie calm. A few said they'd seen a stray like that months ago near an abandoned warehouse at the edge of the city. They called it the ghost dog because it appeared only at night and vanished before anyone could get close. It had once been loved. Some said it had once belonged to an old man who had passed away, leaving the dog homeless. Its mind seemed to wander back to another time, a memory of sirens blaring, of running through rubble, of pulling survivors from collapsed buildings. It had once been a rescue dog, trained to save lives. Inside was an old leather collar with a faded tag. "This was hers," he said quietly. "If you find her, give her this. She'll remember." Emily took the collar gently, tracing the worn edges with her fingers. It felt heavy, not just physically, but with history. She promised Frank she would keep looking. It remembered its handler. The man who had given it purpose, the man who sent it, could still recall even now. Emily would drive through the streets after putting her son to bed, leaving small bowls of food in places people had claimed to see the stray. She would wait in her car, watching from a distance. Sometimes, she'd see a shadow in the corner of her eye, a figure moving swiftly through the darkness, just out of reach. But every time she stepped closer, it vanished. It was as if the dog didn't want to be found. Or perhaps it was waiting for the right moment. But that man was gone, and with his absence came a slow unraveling of everything the dog knew. Every night, from the edge of the shadows, it followed her home after her search, ensuring she got back safely. It would linger outside her building for a while before disappearing into the alleys. It wasn't ready to come close again, but it couldn't stay away entirely. And soon, another storm would bring them face to face once more, revealing a truth Emily never expected. It had been passed from one place to another, finally ending up on the streets, forgotten. And yet, some part of its training remained, a reflex to help, to protect. That's why it had stopped last night when it heard the faint cry of a toddler in the rain. It couldn't just walk away. Others claimed it had been part of a police canine unit but was let go after an injury. No one knew for sure. The more she thought about it, the more determined she became. She began printing simple flyers with a picture of a German shepherd she found online, hoping someone might recognize it. She taped them on street corners, near bus stops, outside grocery stores. Days passed with no word. But then, on the fifth day, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was old and frail but filled with emotion. "I think I know that dog," the man said softly. He introduced himself as Frank, a retired firefighter who lived 3 neighborhoods away. "If it's the same one, she's special. She used to work with us, saved more lives than I can count. But when her handler passed away, no one took her. She just disappeared. But all agreed on one thing: it was smart. Almost too smart for a stray." Frank went on to describe how the dog had been part of a special search and rescue unit, trained to find survivors in the most dangerous conditions. "She's not just a stray," he said. "She's a hero." Emily told him everything about that night in the rain, how the dog had protected her son. There was a long pause on the phone. Then Frank whispered, "She's still doing what she was trained to do." Even without anyone asking, inside a small apartment 2 blocks away, Emily sat on the floor holding her son, still shaken from the night before. It wasn't aimless. It moved with quiet precision, stopping at familiar spots, sniffing, scanning, as if following an old routine. It finally reached the edge of the abandoned warehouse, a place that once bustled with life but now stood silent, its windows broken, its walls covered in ivy. Inside, the German Shepherd slipped through a gap in the door and padded softly across the dusty floor. There, in a corner hidden from view, lay something carefully placed, a torn blanket and a small, rusted food bowl, and next to it, a photograph, faded, creased, but still clear enough to show a smiling man in uniform crouched beside the same German Shepherd, his hand resting proudly on its back. She had barely slept, replaying the moment over and over, the sight of her child in the pouring rain, cradled by a stray German Shepherd. It didn't feel real. Yet the muddy paw prints near the door were proof that it had happened. She couldn't stop thinking about the dog, about those eyes that had locked with hers before it walked away into the storm. There had been no aggression, no fear, just purpose, almost like it had known exactly what it was doing. Emily couldn't ignore the pull she felt to find it, to at least make sure it was safe. Later that day, she began asking neighbors if they'd seen a German Shepherd wandering the streets. Most shook their heads. That night, as the city lights flickered in the distance, the German Shepherd padded silently through alleyways, its buzz leaving faint prints on the damp ground. This dog hadn't always been alone. As the German Shepherd lay down on the blanket, it let out a quiet sigh, resting its head on its paws. Meanwhile, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the dog had come into her life for a reason. Emily's heart tightened as she listened. That evening, Emily went to meet Frank. He was waiting on his porch with a small box in his hands, and so began the quiet search for the dog. But what Emily didn't know was that the dog was still watching her. The days stretched into weeks, and winter grew harsher. They are colder and the nights longer. But Emily didn't stop searching. Each evening, after tucking her son into bed, she would take the old collar Frank had given her and venture into the city's quiet corners. The rain lashed against Emily's face as she struggled to see through the darkness. She could hear the roar of the swollen river beneath, its current dangerously strong. And then, through the blur of rain, she saw movement. Emily felt the warmth of its breath against her skin, and a surge of emotion overwhelmed her. The wooden planks beneath the bridge trembled. The rising river had weakened its foundation. It looked at her with those same soulful eyes she'd seen that first night, a silent hero who asked for nothing in return. Emily reached out and stroked its wet fur. "You saved us." Again, he brought with him an old photograph that revealed the final piece of the puzzle, a piece of history that would explain why this German Shepherd still risked its life to save others. Even after losing everything, the dog closed its eyes briefly, leaning into her touch just for a moment before pulling back slightly, as if still unsure if it could stay. The German Shepherd suddenly barked loudly, warning Emily. She turned just in time to see part of the bridge collapsing behind her. She dried the puppy and placed it in a warm basket near the fireplace, while the German Shepherd stood by the door, hesitant to cross the threshold. But when Emily knelt down and whispered, "You're safe now," the dog finally stepped inside. For the first time, it curled up near the fire, letting out a long, tired sigh. As the storm raged outside, Emily sat beside it, running her fingers gently through its fur, silently promising that it would never have to wander again. Without hesitation, the dog leapt forward, grabbing Emily's coat with its teeth and pulling her towards safety. They ran together, the puppy held tightly in Emily's arms, as more of the bridge gave way, crashing into the raging river below. By the time they reached solid ground, Emily was breathless, shaking, but safe. She slipped the old collar over its head, fastening it carefully. The dog didn't resist. Instead, it lowered its head slightly, as if acknowledging that its journey of wandering was finally over. Emily then scooped up the tiny puppy and cradled it close to her chest. "You don't have to do this alone anymore," she said softly to the German Shepherd. At the far end of the bridge, illuminated by a flickering street lamp, stood the German Shepherd. Its fur was drenched, clinging to its lean frame, but its posture was steady, focused. And beside it, Emily's breath caught, was a small, shivering puppy, no older than a few weeks. Trapped near the edge of the bridge, the German Shepherd barked sharply once, then turned to nudge the tiny creature away from the ledge, shielding it with its own body against the storm. She would call out softly, her voice barely above a whisper in the stillness, hoping the German Shepherd would appear. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help." The German Shepherd's head turned toward her, its eyes reflecting both caution and something deeper, recognition. Emily knelt down, holding out the old collar in her trembling hands. "This was yours, wasn't it?" she whispered. The dog's gaze softened, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. The rain faded into the background, the rushing river muted, as the bond between them connected silently. Slowly, carefully, Emily inched closer until she was just a few feet away. She could see the exhaustion in the German Shepherd's eyes, the weariness of a soul that had been carrying the weight of survival for too long. She extended her hand, palm up, letting the rain drip from her fingers. She left food and water in sheltered spots, always checking the next day to see if it had been taken. And it always was proof that the dog was still out there, surviving, watching. Yet it never revealed itself. Then one night, just as another storm rolled in, heavier and fiercer than the one before, the phone rang. It was Frank, his voice tight with urgency. "They've sighted her," he said, "near the old bridge by the river. But you have to hurry, the river's rising fast with this storm." Emily didn't hesitate. She grabbed her coat, the collar, and raced out into the howling wind. The bridge was old, its wooden planks creaking under the weight of the storm. Emily stepped forward slowly, her heart pounding. "It's okay," she called out gently over the roar of the rain. And then, something remarkable happened. The German Shepherd took one cautious step forward, then another, until its nose gently touched her hand. But just as relief began to settle in, a loud crack echoed through the storm. She knelt on the wet grass, hugging the puppy and looking at the German Shepherd, who stood by her side, soaked but calm. Emily brought them both home that night, but this story wasn't finished yet. Because the next day, when Frank came to see the dog, the morning after the storm was quiet, the streets washed clean by the endless rain. Inside Emily's home, the soft crackling of the fireplace filled the air as the tiny puppy slept soundly in its basket, while the German Shepherd rested nearby, eyes half closed but still alert, its body finally warm after days, perhaps weeks, of cold wandering. Inside were photographs, some faded with time but still clear enough to tell a story. And yet, even after being abandoned, even after wandering alone for so long, it had saved her son in the rain without hesitation. "You've already given so much," whispered, "but now it's your turn to be loved." Emily listened, tears slipping down her cheeks, realizing that the same dog who had saved her son was the same one who had once saved countless others. And now, despite everything it had been through, it had saved her again, not just by rescuing her child. Emily would smile and say, "She's a hero. She always has been." They simply walk on for pause, appearing in the moments we need them most, then fading into the background, leaving behind miracles no one can explain. And this German Shepherd, who had once walked away after saving a toddler in the rain, had finally found her way home. And on quiet evenings, when the rain would patter softly against the windows, the German Shepherd would lie near the fire, the faint glint of an old rescue medal now hanging from its collar, not as a symbol of the past, but as a quiet acknowledgement of a life that had given so much. But by reminding her of the quiet, selfless courage that still exists in the world, the German Shepherd looked at her with eyes that seemed to finally soften, as if understanding that it no longer needed to keep wandering, no longer needed to search for something it had lost. It slowly lay down beside the tiny puppy, curling its body protectively around the little one, and for the first time since Emily had met it, the dog closed its eyes completely, allowing itself to truly rest. Frank wiped his eyes and smiled faintly. She never stopped being who she was. Even without Jake, she is still saving people. He handed Emily one last photograph. This one showed the German Shepherd with a medal around its neck, standing on a stage while a crowd applauded. She was honored as a hero once, Frank said softly. But heroes, they don't need recognition. They just keep going. In one, the German Shepherd stood proudly next to a man in uniform, a young firefighter with a warm smile, his arm draped protectively around the dog. And another, the same dog, was seen emerging from the rubble of a collapsed building, carrying a child's toy in its mouth as rescue workers stood nearby, their faces streaked with dust and tears. It became part of Emily's family, living its days in warmth and love, no longer wandering the cold streets or sleeping in abandoned warehouses. And as for the tiny puppy it had rescued that night on the bridge, it grew strong and playful, always by its mother's side, a living reminder of resilience. Together, they spent their mornings walking through the same streets where once there had been nothing but loneliness, and now there was companionship. Frank's voice was soft but heavy with emotion as he began to explain. This dog was part of our rescue unit, the best we had. She pulled survivors out of earthquakes, floods, fires, places no one else could reach. She saved lives, more than I can count. He paused, his hand gently stroking the dog's head. Her handler, Jake, loved her more than anything. They were inseparable. But a few years ago, during a big rescue mission, Jake didn't make it out. After that, he changed. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't respond to anyone. We tried to keep her at the station, but she escaped one night, and no one saw her again. Until now. Emily moved gently around the room, not wanting to disturb the fragile peace that had settled over her small apartment. There was a knock on the door. When she opened it, Frank stood there, holding a small folder, his expression solemn yet tender. He stepped inside slowly, his eyes immediately finding the German Shepherd. For a long moment, neither of them moved, and then, quietly, the German Shepherd lifted its head, its ears twitching, its eyes widening as recognition dawned. It stood, taking cautious steps toward Frank, and in that moment, he let out a shaky breath. I knew it, he whispered. It's really you. He knelt down, and the dog pressed its wet nose into his trembling hands. Frank's eyes filled with tears. Emily watched in silence as Frank gently placed the folder on the table and opened it. Emily felt her throat tighten as she looked at the dog, imagining the pain of losing the person it trusted most. Emily knelt beside the dog, her hand resting gently on its fur. Frank stayed for a while longer, sharing more stories of the dog's past rescues, the children it had pulled from burning homes, the elderly it had guided through floodwaters, the endless nights it had spent searching through debris. From that day forward, the German Shepherd never left. Sometimes, people in the neighborhood would stop and ask about the dog with the wise, soulful eyes. Because some heroes wear uniforms, some carry badges, but others,